All right, so going a little bit early here so we can kind of have as much time to go through review problems as possible. So a couple of things I want to mention up the top. For any of those of you who had some weird scoring with that participation quiz from yesterday, I made sure everyone's got credit for that last one. It was just opinion based. It was scoring them initially wrong. So I don't know if it impacted anyone in this section, but just to make sure I'm taking keeping an eye on it, and you'll get full credit for that last question because it was just opinion based. Um, a reminder before we kind of talk about the exam. So that module 3 and module 4 quiz are due by the end of the day today. Same kind of thing for these participation quizzes. And we'll have a participation quiz today as well. It's just going to be opinion based. So it's just a matter of getting on and getting it done. Because we have the exam tomorrow, which will be from 11:15 to 3:15. You can get on at any point. I know that 2 to 3:15 should work for you since you're in this section. But you really can start it at any point that you want to in that time block. Once you start, you'll have an hour and 15 minutes to complete it. So if you want the full time, the very latest you can start is 25 multiple choice questions. That practice exam has 20 questions that look pretty similar to module 2, 3, and 4 material. For any other questions, I might, have a couple, even though there's one question on the practice exam, maybe I'll turn it into 2. Or all those old practice problems would also be good problems to review, and that are potentially see problems that look similar to those on the exam as well. So because there's not as much module 1 in that practice exam, I would probably also make sure first thing I do after going through that practice final is going back through those practice problems from week 1, and I'll highlight the ones that I think are important here as we kind of do some review here today. I have the exam sitting there. If you try to access it, it should tell you it's not available until tomorrow at 11:15. So it'll just be sitting here on the homepage. You can also find it by going to assignments, and it's under, I'll make its own category. I forgot that I copied and pasted over here. I'll add an assignment here. Let me just do it right now. So exams, you'll be able to find that midterm up here at the top as well, just to kind of make it clear. You can access it through assignments. It's also just going to be down here, what looks like a new module on the Canvas homepage as well. Okay. I put up a formula sheet. It's really just the midpoint formula. So it's nothing, you'll have access to this while you're taking the exam. Kind of see here, it's the midpoint formula, just using the price elasticity of demand. We could also calculate other elasticities using the midpoint method, which I think we'll have time to cover a problem like that today. And then after the exam tomorrow, you will see this next module kind of get published. So I've got the materials already there. We're combining modules 5 and 6. The only module reading that you have to do for credit is module 6. So module 5, there isn't a ton. We can go really quickly. And so module 6 is going to be the module reading you have to do for points after Monday's class period. So you have to do that before we start class on Monday, right? We don't have class on tomorrow because of the exam, and then Friday is the 4th. So Monday, you need to make sure in the next however many days, you get this module 6 reading done. I don't have it set to release until after the exam tomorrow, just so that people are focusing on the exam, but this will pop up after the exam at 3:15 p.m. tomorrow. Okay. Let me think if there's anything else before we jump into exam review and talk more about the exam. And you'll see kind of the module 7 reading pop up as well. That'll be due before we cover the module 7 material, which won't be until next Wednesday, next class. Okay. Any questions logistically for me before we kind of just dive into kind of doing some review? So I think I've covered everything. 25 multiple choice questions, hour and 15 minutes to complete it. You won't see your results right away. I have them set to be released at 5 tomorrow, so it should grade the exams. I should have them graded and then results posted by 5. Once you submit it, you have a little bit of a wait time to see what score you got, right? And that's just a way for me to kind of be able to give feedback, see which ones you got correct and incorrect, while not having those answers out there while other people are taking it. Okay. Any questions before we look at this practice exam. Logistics. Okay. All right. So I'll kind of ask you guys if you have specific problems you want to see worked through, and I'll kind of start with those. Based on my last section, we didn't have time to cover every single problem here, but the ones that people had questions on, we got all out of the way. So any questions that you want to see reviewed from this practice exam and any other practice problems, those are fair game as well. I can pull those up and work through problems. Okay. Nobody?
Could you do 14 through 16?
Okay, so everyone feels good with everything here. So, okay. So this is a good one. So, excuse me. Let's say I gave you something that looked like this. Right, so I've got supply and demand, and we're talking about shortages and surpluses. So I'll give you this depiction, and I'll also show you another type of way I could ask this question. So suppose that currently, I've got the current equilibrium price is going to be where supply is equal to demand. So that's going to be right here at a price of 40. Okay. If instead they're charging a price of 20, they're not allowing there to be a higher price, the quantity supplied at that price of 20 would be 40, and the quantity demanded would be 120. So anytime we had quantity demanded being greater than the quantity supplied, we said that would be a shortage. More people want to buy the good than what's being produced. So we have this shortage. What's the value of that shortage? Just the difference between our quantity supplied, 40, and our quantity demanded of 120. So that difference would be a shortage of 80 units. Okay. If instead I had just given you a price like 60, which of the following things are going to be true? Well, instead of giving you that visual, another form of shortage surplus questions might look something like this. I really could just tell you the current equilibrium price for a good is 40. Okay. I then say if they set the price at 60, what's going to be true? Do we have shortages, surpluses? What's true about the quantity supplied, quantity demanded? Well, anytime we're thinking about this equilibrium price, we know that's going to be where supply is equal to demand, right? So downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve. Here is where the equilibrium price and quantity should be. Okay. When we said it was set at 20, we had a shortage created. If we set it at 60, and I could choose any price, so I'm here it was 40, instead it was 60. Any price above the equilibrium, we said what's going to exist. Well, 45, 50, 60, at these prices, where am I at on my demand curve? I'm going to be somewhere down here. Where would I be at on that supply curve? Well, at higher prices, producers want to supply more. So anytime I've got the quantity demanded being less than the quantity supplied, I know there I've actually got a surplus. There's more units on the market than people want to buy. So that's going to be true anytime I have a price set above that equilibrium. Okay. So at this new higher price, the quantity demanded will be less than the equilibrium price, and our quantity supplied would be greater than that equilibrium price. Okay. So even if I didn't have the visual to go along with this, just knowing the equilibrium price is 40, if the price is set above that, I know that I'm going to have not a shortage, but a surplus. I know the quantity demanded is going to be lower than the old equilibrium, right, relative to the market equilibrium. The quantity supplied should be higher, so this one's not going to be true. This one's not going to be true. B should be. C, the new price in the market is lower. Well, if I'm setting the price at 60, right, relative to the equilibrium price, which I can identify from the graph at 40, well, now that price is higher than the old equilibrium. Okay. So there, I'm not giving you the equilibrium price in 15. There, you would have to know how to get that from a graph. Okay. And that's just where supply is equal to demand. If I instead had told you the equilibrium price, then you know any price set above that, we should have this surplus existing. It's two different ways of kind of getting at the same concept there. Okay. Any questions over those two before I keep moving? Okay. So 16 combines two things, and really this one should be combines two concepts that really shouldn't be too bad, but they're like wrapping it all up into one. Said they. I'm wrapping it up into one question. So I'm told that there's a percentage change in the price of textbooks, which is equal to 20%. Right? I then am telling you that there's a percentage change in quantity demanded that was equal to, I think that was the one that was 5, or it was going technically down by 5%. And then my percentage change in the quantity supplied from this result, for this price change would be 40%. Okay. So I've got a price change and I've got the resulting change in the quantity supplied and quantity demanded. I can calculate my elasticity of demand. So remember, our price elasticity of demand and supply, that first word is what goes in our denominator. So it's that percentage change in price of the good. And for demand, it's the resulting percentage change in my quantity demanded. For supply, resulting change in my quantity supplied. So really, it's just a matter of plugging these values in. Right? Now, you'll notice, even if I don't want to go through and plug these into the formula, if there's a 20% change in price, and as a result, people only stop buying 5%, they were responding by a lower amount than what that price change was, or they weren't being very responsive. So we really should think about not being responsive. Demand should be inelastic. Now, the reason why is because when that percent change in price is below the percent change in the quantity demanded, when I actually compute what that elasticity is, 0.25, that's less than 1. We said anytime the elasticity is less than 1, inelastic demand. Same kind of thing for supply. I can plug my values in, or I can look and see, oh, a 20% price change caused suppliers to supply 40% more. They were really responsive, or they were very elastic to that price change. If I just plug in what those percent changes are, I get an elasticity of 2. That's greater than 1. Anytime I have an elasticity that's greater than 1, we would say it's elastic. Right? Here, the elasticity of supply is elastic. Elasticity of demand, we would say demand is inelastic. Okay. Any other problems that people wanted me to kind of start with here? Okay. No? Okay, we'll come up with one as we're going through these. At any point, you feel free to ask about one, right? So I'll go back, and one that I can kind of guarantee you'll see something that looks like this is problem 12. Okay. So if I give you two equations, and here I'll show you how I could even make it a little bit harder on the exam. So I give you two equations. Let's say, so I had 160 minus 3q, and then I had, was it 20 plus 4q? Okay. Now, in the practice exam, I had QD and QS, which notation you can kind of think about, well, that's quantity demanded, quantity supplied. What if I just gave you these two equations, though, and I asked you to find the equilibrium price and quantity? Which one, or I asked you to find the marginal benefit. What was the question on 10? So the marginal benefit of the third unit. Well, I know that if I'm looking for the marginal benefit of the third unit, I need to be looking at my demand curve. So which of these would be my demand curve? Well, remember, demand is always going to be downward sloping. As the price goes down, people want to buy more. Or said differently, if people are buying more, right, the only way they'll do that is if the price goes down. So this negative slope, that's how I can identify, oh, this would be my demand equation. How would I find the marginal benefit of the third unit? Well, the price is reflecting that first price at which someone's willing to buy this good, or what their marginal benefit must be, right? We said consumers, people choose to do things only when that marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. So the very first, what to consumers, what's the marginal cost, the price? So the very first price that they're willing to buy this good has to be exactly equal to what their marginal benefit is. So all I would do there is, what do I want to know the marginal benefit of? That third unit. So here I have what? 151. Okay. Any questions on that idea? Now, I also know that my supply curve is upward sloping. As the price goes up, producers want to supply more. So the fact that I have a positive slope for this equation, that's how I could have identified that's my supply equation, right? So if I tell you here's the supply and demand equation, I don't tell you which is which. The one that has a negative slope, we should know is the demand curve. The one that has a positive slope is supply. Okay? Now to find the equilibrium, right? Here our steps are going to be first, I know that equilibrium price and quantity is where my supply equation is equal to my demand equation, right? So I'm going to set those equal to each other, right? So once I do that, so here's my demand equation, set that equal to my supply equation. The second step is just going to be using algebra to solve for what that equilibrium quantity is. That quantity where the quantity supplied is exactly the same as the quantity demanded. So I've got a little bit of, I can do the math here. So I do what? Subtract 20 from both sides. I've got what? 140. I'm going to add 3Q to both sides. And I've got 7Q now over here. Divide both sides by 7. And I get that equilibrium quantity is equal to what? 20. Okay. So I now know my equilibrium quantity. How do I find the corresponding equilibrium price? Well, the next step is plug that equilibrium quantity I found into either supply or my demand equation. Okay. So I'm going to plug it into either one. See if I can get this all to be on the same. I think you can see all this. So I'm taking that quantity. If I plug it into demand, all right, I'll see that that equilibrium price should be 100. If I've done the math correct, I could use either the supply or demand equation, and hopefully I get the same answer. So if I take my, oh, and I put an equal sign, so here I'm writing and talking. So if I take my supply equation, plug 20 in for the quantity there, I should get that same price of 100. If I get different values, I either identified that equilibrium quantity wrong or I made a math error somewhere. Okay. So that fourth step, once I plug my equilibrium quantity into either supply or demand, really just kind of do the algebra to solve for what that equilibrium quantity is. In this case, it was 100. Okay. Any questions over anything there? Like I said, I can guarantee you I will have a problem on the exam where you have to find an equilibrium price and quantity from a supply and demand equation. Okay. Any other questions people want to see? Like I said, otherwise I'll kind of pick and choose. Okay. All right. Not as many questions as the first section here. So, we'll go back even a little bit further here. So you'll kind of notice, so 6 through 9 are really using all the things we talked about in module 3. So I would make sure I go back and review all of the things that can shift supply or demand. So whether that's input prices, changing the price of substitutes, etc., I would make sure I know how to do all of those, right? Not only know whether or not they increase or decrease supply and demand, but then what are the resulting impacts on the equilibrium price and quantity? Okay. So let's do one specifically. We'll do substitutes and consumption here. So I'll kind of work through 8 and 9. So number 8, we've got two goods, beer and hard seltzers. They're substitutes in consumption. If the price of beer increases, what's going to happen to the equilibrium quantity for and price for hard seltzers? Okay. So I've got two goods that I'm thinking about. So I'm told they're substitutes in consumption. So I'm thinking about, I've got hard seltzers I've got beer, and I'm told the price of beer goes up. Okay. Well, if these two goods are substitutes, and I'm asked a question about the equilibrium quantity and price for hard seltzers, right? I know that before this change, the equilibrium would be where the supply is equal to the demand curve, or the quantity supplied is equal to my quantity demanded. So we'll do equilibrium price and quantity here. If I've got substitutes in consumption, if the price of beer goes up, what are people going to be more likely to buy? Well, beer is higher, less likely to buy beer, more likely to buy these hard seltzers. So consumption should be my key. That what should be shifting? Anytime we're talking about consumers, we're talking about the demand curve. So it should be a shift in my demand curve. If it was something about producers, it would be a shift in my supply curve. So here, if there's substitutes in consumption, that means that the quantity that people want to buy is going to go up. So at every single price, the quantity demanded is now going to be higher. Or we said a rightward shift, increases in either demand or supply are moving away from this 0 point. So I've seen my demand curve increase. What are the resulting effects of that? That's caused my equilibrium price and my equilibrium quantity to go up. Okay. So this increase in the price of beer caused my equilibrium price and quantity for hard seltzers both to increase. Okay. Now, this is where I would make sure I know all of the things that shift supply and demand, because if I had this exact same problem, but instead I told you these are substitutes in production, well, substitutes in production, if I'm thinking about this market for hard seltzers, right? If it initially started out, here's my equilibrium. If the price of beer goes up, in terms of producers, are they going to be more likely to want to produce beer or hard seltzers? Well, higher prices, I want to switch my production process to produce whatever I can sell for a higher price. So this would actually cause producers to want to supply less of the other good or less hard seltzers. So at every single point, at every single price, they're now willing to supply a lower amount, or I've seen a supply decrease. Once again, for producers, when supply is shifting, it's getting closer to this 0 point. So what has that done to my equilibrium price and quantity? It's caused my price to go up, but a decrease in supply would actually cause my quantity to go down. So I've got equilibrium price is going up, equilibrium quantity is going to go down. Okay. And I'm writing Q here. It's probably not really technically, I should really be thinking more about this as like my, my supply for beer, my supply of hard seltzers, and over here I should have been writing kind of demand. But if it's easier to think about it in terms of what I want to produce more or less of this good, if the substitute has a higher price in consumption or the substitute in production has a lower price or higher price, that's another way of thinking about it, right? So drawing out these supply and demand shifts and identifying their impacts on the equilibrium price and quantity, definitely going to see a handful of questions on the exam about that. Any other questions there? Okay. So I've got an example here where on number 9, but I'm going to do something slightly different, but it's the same thing where we have simultaneous shifts. So I'm going to go through one that I would be harder than what I would expect you to know on the exam in terms of I won't ever have just one thing changing and having impact supply and demand. It would be more like problem 9 where I say, excuse me, input prices go up, so that's going to cause supply to decrease. Increase in population should cause demand to increase. And then think about If these things happen at the same time, what will the resulting effect be on the equilibrium quantity and price? So one of the things that doesn't pop up here, but a determinant of both supply and demand that you should know how it works, right, are price expectations. So we talked about these. So let's say that I've got people expect the price to be lower in the future. Okay. If I think the price is going to be lower in the future, and I don't specify to you whether or not that's consumers or producers, and we're just thinking about both of them have this expectation. So that price expectation will cause both consumers and producers to maybe change their behavior. So let's think about the first effect this would have on demand. Okay. So we start out, and I'm not going to use the ease just to kind of save, oh, sorry, not going to use the ease to save myself a little bit of space. All right, so here's that equilibrium price and quantity. If I have lower expected prices in the future, what's going to happen to current demand? So if I want to buy something, if I think the price is going to be lower tomorrow, what's going to happen to my demand for that product today? At the same current price, I'm willing to buy less of it. Right? Or currently, I'm going to see a decrease in demand, right? This leftward shift. What does that decrease in demand do? So this decrease in demand caused both the equilibrium price and quantity to go down. Okay. Now, if I don't specify who has these expectations, and it's just both people, both consumers and producers. So here we had this caused a demand decrease. However, for producers, if they expect, and I forgot to add in, where does our equilibrium price and quantity start? So if producers expect lower prices tomorrow, what's going to happen to their current supply? Well, if I'm selling something and I think I can sell it for less money tomorrow, what do I want to make sure I do? Sell it today. So at any price, right, I'm willing to supply more to the market, or I see supply increase, right, moving further from that 0 point. Okay. So what did that do to my equilibrium? That caused both the quantity to go up, but the price to go down. So if these two things happen at the same time, both consumers and producers expect a price change in the future, the supply increase caused my price to go down, but my quantity to go up. So if I'm thinking about if they're happening at the same time, what's the total effect going to be? Well, you can kind of see here, I use the arrows because I think it's kind of helpful there. You can see that if they happen at the same time, they're both going to be pushing the price down. However, for the change in quantity, opposite directions. So we would say we don't really know. We would need to know something about the size of the effects. Now, I'm not going to have any problems where I tell you, one shift is larger than the other. Here, any type of problem you would be asked about simultaneous shifts, the answer there is going to be that the change in quantity, I'll either use the term indeterminate or we cannot determine the change. Right? Now, the example I worked through is a little bit different than 9. So 9 would be a good one to be able to work through. Instead of a demand decrease and supply increase, it has a demand increase and supply decrease. Okay? And then you have other combinations, the other two combinations you could work through as well, both supply and demand increase, both supply and demand decrease at the same time. So you'll definitely see a problem where you have simultaneous shifts and have to determine what that total effect is or what the total effect on equilibrium quantity and price are. And there, sometimes the answer will be you cannot determine the change. Okay. Any other questions on that or other problems you want to see worked through? Okay. All right. Let's work through these because I can guarantee you'll see very similar problems to 1, 2, and 3. For sure, 2 and 3. So let's say I gave you two individuals and I told you what they could produce using all of their resources. So these are going to be back to what we were talking about with our production possibilities curves. If I then am like in problem 3, I'm thinking about what's the economy-wide production possibilities curve look like? How could I build that just using this information? Okay. So starting out, I was told what I would do to answer these types of problems is draw out each individual's, and we'll put green eggs on the x-axis here. Doesn't matter which one we do first, but this one might make it a little bit easier, I think, in terms of the math. So we have 2 people, Dennis and Frank. Dennis is using all of his resources to produce t-shirts. He can produce 100 and did I get these answered? Or what was his? His was 120 and 40. Sorry. 120 and 40, right? So his individual production possibilities curve, either 120 t-shirts or 40 green eggs. For Frank, this was going to be 140 and 70. Okay. So if I were to put these on the same graph, right, who has a higher intercept for both goods? Well, in fact, Frank has a higher intercept for both of these. So we would say that who has an absolute advantage in green egg production and t-shirt production? Both of these would be Frank, because using all of his resources, he can produce more of that good than Dennis could. Okay. When it comes to a comparative advantage, there we're looking for who can produce something, so green eggs, t-shirts, at a lower cost. How can we determine costs of our x-axis good? That's simply going to be the slope of that individual's production possibilities curve. So finding a slope, change in y over the change in x. What's on our y-axis? T-shirts. Between these 2 points, we're going from 120 to 0. The x-axis, we're going from 0 to 40. So -3 is our slope, or the cost to Dennis of one more of the x-axis good would be 3 t-shirts, right? One more green egg, he'd have to give up 3 t-shirts. Same kind of thing over here for Frank. 140 to 0 is a change in y. 0 to 70 is a change in x. So who has the lower cost to that x-axis good? Who has the lower or kind of smaller slope value? That would be Frank. Now, inherently, if I have this is my cost of one more green egg, how can I find the cost of the y-axis good? So we said the cost of our y-axis good is just equal to 1 over cost of our x-axis good. So for Dennis, that would be what? The cost of a t-shirt to Dennis would be 1/3 of a green egg. And then the cost to Frank would be 1/2. Which of these is lower? Well, 1/3 is a little bit lower than 1/2. So Dennis would have the comparative advantage in t-shirt production. Okay. Questions there? So you can determine the cost of the x-axis good or the cost of the y-axis good by drawing out each individual's production possibilities curve. Once we have that information, we could then be asked about questions like which of these points is going to be on the curve. Okay. So if I'm thinking about my entire economy, which is just 2 people in this example, if they're only producing t-shirts, how many total could they produce? Well, we would look at each person, 120, 140, add those together. If our economy is only producing t-shirts here, we can get 260. Only producing green eggs, 110. So those 2 points should be some easy ones to figure out. The next easiest point to figure out on our production possibilities curve is going to be this point in the middle, which is going to represent where, initially, who are we going to rely on to produce that x-axis good? Whoever can produce it at a lower cost. So we're going to rely on Frank. So Frank starts producing green eggs. Eventually, he gets to this point where he's using all of his resources. He's got 70. But now the only person producing t-shirts would be the person we're not having produce green eggs, which is Dennis. And so we only have 120. if we want to go any further in production for green eggs than 70, who do I have to start relying on? Dennis, where my costs are a little bit higher. Okay. So this point in the middle is going to be where each individual is only producing what they have a comparative advantage in. Okay. So I think if we're looking at the possible options here, we just said that point of 7120 is that middle point on our curve. 0 to 60 was one of the intercepts. So we just need to check these other 2 points. Okay. So let's check this point first. Would 80 green eggs, 90 t-shirts be on this curve? Well, if I want to get to 80 green eggs, I've already used all of Frank's resources. So who am I going to have to rely on? Dennis, right? So what point would be on my curve here? Well, if every green egg costs Dennis 3 t-shirts, what's the total cost of 10 more green eggs? 30 t-shirts. So he'd have to reduce his production of t-shirts by 30. So the point on the curve would be 80, 90. So that was, I think, answer B. So that one's on the curve as well. So hopefully the last one is the one that's not on the curve, right? So we're thinking about what point is not in the curve. I think it was like 41, 40. So if I only wanted 40 green eggs, who am I relying on for those first 40? Well, I haven't used all of Frank's resources yet, so I'm still relying on him. So what's the total cost? 40 times each green egg was costing Frank 2 t-shirts. So we would say from this point, to get to 40 green eggs, Frank has to stop producing 80 t-shirts. So the point that's on the curve would be what? 180. Okay. So that point of 4140 would actually be somewhere below the curve. So that's going to be the point that's not on our curve, 4140. That point would actually be what we call inefficient, right? We wouldn't be using all of our resources there. Every point on the curve we said was production efficient. This represented all the different combinations of these two goods that we could produce using all of our resources. So any point below that would actually be inefficient, and that's going to be the point that's not on our curve. That's how we can kind of check these different points if it isn't one of our kind of 3 main points that we would use to build that production possibilities curve. Okay. Any questions of that problem before we keep moving here? So that would have been D was the one that's not on our curve. Okay. And you'll notice, like, I'm starting out drawing these individual, I likely won't be giving you these graphs. A lot of the times you're going to have to build those individual production possibilities curves, or you're going to have to kind of start, you have to draw your own graph there. Okay. Let's do some more recent stuff. So let's do 20. Okay. So I can also guarantee you'll have a question that looks very similar to 20 about elasticities and total revenues. Okay. So I'm told that I've got this product, bottle of water, the price is going down. The elasticity between those two prices of those 2 points is calculated to be negative 3.4. We always know the price elasticity of demand is negative. We really just only care about the magnitude, so we can kind of think about this as 3.4. What's going to happen to total revenues when I have this price change? So anytime we're thinking about total revenues, I said you should be able to draw these stacked graphs, right? So we've got our demand curve, and underneath it, at all of these quantities, we're going to draw the corresponding total revenue. Okay. We said total revenue is going to look something like this, where the point that it's maximized at is going to be the portion of the demand curve where the elasticity of demand is unit elastic or equal to 1 in absolute value. We said any point above this, right, our prices are relatively high. So if we're thinking about the elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, when prices are high, changes in the price are going to be relatively small percentage changes. But when quantity is low, any change in quantity is going to be a relatively large percent change in quantity. So our elasticity on the upper portion of our demand curve is greater than 1, or we know that demand kind of starts out as elastic. And then the reverse is true when we're looking at lower prices. There, any change in price will be a high percent change. Higher quantities, any change would be a low percentage change. So down here, we're going to be on the inelastic portion of our demand curve. So no matter what part we're on, we want to be moving towards where total revenues are maximized or moving towards that unit elastic point. So we were told that the elasticity was what? In absolute terms, 3.4. So we know that we should be somewhere up here on the demand curve. We're told that we're lowering the price from 1 to 0.75. So as I lower the price, sell a higher quantity, what's happening to my total revenues? They're going up. Okay. Now, if I instead had given you, I don't know, numbers where you had to calculate even elasticity, and you find that it was like 0.2 instead, well, there you know you're on the inelastic portion. And there, if you would have decreased the price, what would you have done to total revenues? Well, if I'm on the inelastic portion, decreasing the price is pushing me further away from that maximization point. So I'm actually seeing that there my total revenues from a price decrease would actually be going down. So understanding that relationship between price changes and total revenue, I would draw something out that looks like this. Okay. Any questions there? Okay. So 19, I'll use this one to kind of make a point that just some test taking stuff. When you're working through these problems, sometimes like one of the best things you can do is just to rule out answers. Okay. So if I'm looking at a cross price elasticity, so what is a cross price elasticity? Well, price elasticity of demand was the change in the price of the good you're looking at and the response from the quantity demanded of that good. Cross price elasticity was saying when the price of another good changes, what's happening to the quantity demanded of the good that you're looking at, X. So I think in our example, this was like a percentage change in the quantity of alcohol from a percentage change in the price of marijuana. Okay. Well, we're looking at cross price elasticities. We don't care about the sign. Right? Also, if we're looking at the change in the price of a good and how the quantity demanded of the other good responds, cross price elasticities should be telling us something about whether or not these are substitute or complementary goods. Normal or inferior goods doesn't even make sense here. I should have ruled those out right away. What are normal and inferior goods? That's referencing the relationship between changes in income and demand. That's not my income elasticity, right? We're looking at the cross price elasticity. So hopefully I'm going to guess either C or D here, but I had no idea. Now, which one is going to be true? Which one, is it going to be substitutes or complements? Well, I was told this is 1.8, right? So what that means is that if the price of marijuana is increasing, the only way that my fraction is positive is if what? The amount of alcohol from that it's responding to that price change also goes up. So if the price of a good goes up and as a result people buy more of another good, that must mean I'm buying less marijuana substituting towards something else. Anytime I've got a positive cross price elasticity, this told me these two goods were substitutes. I could think of it the reverse as well. Let's say the price of marijuana went down. If I have a positive income elasticity, the only way that it's positive is if the amount of alcohol they bought also went down. So there, if marijuana is becoming cheaper, people buy more marijuana, fewer of the substitute good. So negative over negative, I would still have a positive cross price elasticity. Either way I want to think about this, this tells me these two goods are substitutes when the cross price elasticity is positive. Okay. If instead I had told you, I don't know, the cross price elasticity was negative 0.4, well then you would think about anytime the price of marijuana is going up, people actually buy less alcohol. Well, if they're substituting towards alcohol, that doesn't make sense. What must be true? they're using these two goods at the same time. So when the price of batteries goes up, the amount that people buy of things that require batteries is going to go down. So anytime you have different signs here, negative over a positive or positive over a negative, you're going to end up with a negative cross price elasticity. And that's going to tell you that these two goods are complements. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. I would also know how to use that midpoint formula, not just for the price elasticity of demand, but for any elasticity. So price elasticity of supply, income elasticity, etc. So here I've got an example where I've got changes in income and then the resulting change in the quantity. So once again, just some test taking stuff on these multiple choice to kind of help it. If you're not sure, you can at least limit the number of, make your guess have a higher percent of being right. So here I said, you can treat 40 and 50,000 as just 40 and 50. They won't change your calculations just to make it a little bit easier for you. But if someone has more money and as a result, they bought more of this good, more shoes, you're going to have a positive percent change in income and a positive percent change in the coin demanded. So anytime we're looking at an income elasticity of demand, instead of the price changing, we're now thinking about the initial change is the change in income, and then the responding percent change in the quantity demanded of that good. So if income goes up, and as a result, people buy more of something like we had in this example, my income elasticity would be positive. What is that relationship? When income is higher, we buy more of a good. That tells us that it's a normal good. Said differently, if I had that when income goes down, people buy less, negative over negative, still a positive value. Here's my normal good. Okay. And then the exact opposite is true. If I have income goes up, and as a result, people buy less of something, well, then I know I've got an income elasticity that's negative. Having more money, but I buy less of a good, that tells me it's an inferior product. Okay. So in this problem, if instead of 10 and 12, I had 12 to 10, well, there I know I've got an increase in income, a decrease in quantity. That's going to tell me that I have a negative income elasticity. They should be inferior product. But I didn't. They both went up. So I know it has to be that this is a normal good. Okay. From there, I actually have two options now, A or C. How do I actually calculate what that income elasticity is? Okay. So how do I find the percentage change in something? Using that midpoint method, I'm going to take the change in that thing and divide it by the average. So for us, we're going to take our new quantity minus the old quantity. That's the change. Dividing it by the average, well, I'm really just finding the average of two values. So add them up, divide by 2. I would do the exact same thing for income. It's just now I'm looking at the change in income divided by my average income. So here I've got income 2 minus income 1 is the change. How do I find the average of two numbers? Simply add them up, divide by 2. Okay. So at this point, it's just a matter of plugging in the values from that problem. Okay. Now, what I would do to kind of make it a little bit easier on myself with all these parentheses, so I'm going to plug everything in up here. So I think quantity was going from 12 to 10, dividing it by the average of those two numbers. Income, I said you could use just 40 and 50, kind of representing thousands. 40 plus 50 over 2 would give me the average. Instead of getting all this entered into a calculator, I mean, the math I'm never going to throw at you is going to be crazy hard. So I would think about this is like what, 2 over 11, and this is going to be 10 over 45. I think if I work this out, this is something like approximately 0.18 and 0.22 or something like that. Right? So remember, these aren't in percentage form, but what the numerator and denominator represent are the percentage changes in quantity and income. If I wanted to scale these up to a percent, I would just multiply each by 100, or really this is saying when the income changes by 22%, the resulting change in the quantity demanded was 18%. So consumers weren't responding as large as that initial income percent change was. This fraction is going to be less than 1. So we would kind of think about this as like an inelastic normal good. Or I think this works out to be 0.818, the actual value. So another question that wasn't asked here, but if it's underneath or it's less than 1, the income elasticity being less than 1, that it's inelastic, tells me this is a necessity good. Okay. If it was greater than 1, there we said we would have a luxury good. Okay. But I would focus more on, from a problem like this, how do I actually calculate using the midpoint method what that elasticity is? And then what does the sign tell me? Normal versus inferior. Okay. All right. Which ones haven't we done here? Any other problems that you had specific questions on that you wanted to see? Once again, doesn't have to just be from the practice final, can be from old practice problems. So where are we at in time? 25 minutes. I'll work through 17 and then I'm going to go back to practice problems from week 1 and kind of show you what you should expect to kind of know from that module in terms of questions. Okay. So on 17, there could be a variety of different types of questions related to this. I would make sure I understand the qualities and traits of 2 of the extremes when it comes to elasticity. So I've got 2 types of extreme elasticities represented by a completely vertical demand curve and a completely horizontal demand curve. Okay. If I have a completely vertical demand curve, well, before we even get too lost into elasticities, what is the slope of a completely vertical line? Well, here the change in price over change in quantity, y over x. Anytime the price changes, the change in the quantity is equal to 0. So anything divided by 0, my slope here would actually be what? Infinite or negative infinity? You want to think about it that way? What's the slope of a flat line? Well, change in price, even if it's 0, I could still see the quantity changing. So anything above 0, but 0 over anything is 0. So the slope of my horizontal curve is 0. The slope of my vertical curve is infinity. Now, what's the elasticity of demand for a completely vertical demand curve? Well, once again, this is the percent change in the quantity demanded over my percentage change in price. Okay. So here, even if I have a change in the price, so anything above 0, what is my percentage change in the quantity demanded? It stays the same. So with a completely vertical demand curve, the slope is infinite, but my elasticity is 0, right? The price is changing. People aren't responding at all. If they're not responding at all, we would say they're being perfectly inelastic. And then on the flip side, over here, I would have, what's the percentage change in price? It's not changing. But as a result, people are still changing how much they buy. There, my elasticity of demand is actually infinite, right? The exact opposite of kind of the slope. So if my no price change, but I'm still responding, we would almost say like I'm being perfectly elastic. I'm responding even when price doesn't change. Okay. So even if it changes an infinite small amount, I'm responding by a lot, right? An infinite amount here. Okay. So kind of those 2 extremes. And then as we move, right, to a flatter and flatter curve, it's going from being perfectly inelastic to more and more elastic. Okay. Any other questions that people had that we haven't worked through from this practice exam? Okay. So go back up here. I'll pull open these practice problems from week 1. I would use these questions to kind of study for the questions that you might see in the exam that come from module 1. I can guarantee you'll see something that looks similar to this, with the idea of opportunity costs, right? So if you have multiple activities you can choose between, the opportunity cost of your decision is the next highest value of what you're not doing. So if I choose to go golfing in this example, I could have chosen to do 3 things: go to a movie, golf, or nap. If I choose to go golfing, what is the highest valued thing I'm giving up? That would be napping. So my opportunity cost would be $62. It's not the sum of these 2 things, because the only way that would be my opportunity cost is if the time that I was using to go golfing, I could do both of these 2. I kind of specified here, you can only do one of these activities at a time. So there, the next highest value of what I'm giving up would be my opportunity cost. Let's say they chose to go or chose to take a nap. Then what would their opportunity cost of that be? Well, now the next highest valued thing I'm not doing is going golfing. So there, my opportunity cost would be 36. So your opportunity cost when you're looking at the decision between doing several things is the highest value of what the next highest value of what you're giving up. Okay. So then another one that we can kind of think about this concept that really 3, I think 4, 5 is kind of getting at it, but 5 will probably be a better way of thinking about this concept, and one you might be more likely to see. Let's say I've got marginal benefits here of a different quantities of beer, or whatever this good is. Well, one thing that we used in or talked about in week 1 that we've used subsequently, especially with like supply and demand, is when people buy more of something, right? The very first unit provides me a higher marginal benefit than the second, and that provides a higher marginal benefit than the third, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So this is the idea that we have diminishing marginal benefits. I always choose to do something if I'm a self-rational individual, if the marginal benefit of that is greater than or equal to my marginal cost. So we're thinking about purchasing a good, right? Buying, a beer here. The marginal cost was the price. So as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the price, we know the person would choose to buy that quantity of beer. So for the very first one, the price is 7. Is the marginal benefit above that? Yes. So they buy the first one. What about the second? Marginal benefit greater than the marginal cost or the price of 7. So yes. Third, greater than 7, yes. Fourth, yes. Fifth, no. So they won't buy the 5th beer. They'd stop at the 4th one. So that would be kind of our optimal number of beers to consume based off the marginal benefits and the price. If the price goes up, what's going to happen to the optimal number? Well, if my marginal costs are increasing, it could be now that there is a quantity. So let's say this goes up to $10. Now what is the optimal amount? Well, if costs are higher, there could be quantities where now the cost is above the marginal benefit where it wasn't before, and I would choose not to buy that. So here we could work through it and see, oh yeah, now for the first 3 beers, that marginal benefit is greater than 10, the price, the marginal cost. For the 4th, it no longer is, so now I would stop at 3. Okay. So I think here knowing, thinking about when people choose to do something, this relationship between the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to marginal cost. How do we find marginal costs? Marginal cost is really just the change, right? So if I have total costs, like here in this phone plan example, if I'm currently spending 50, the new plan is 75, my marginal cost is not $75 if I choose to upgrade the plan. It's whatever that cost changed by, right? So here my cost went up by only 25. Okay. And this idea of diminishing marginal benefit, just to kind of maybe connect some things throughout all these modules. We said we know the marginal benefit as someone chooses to buy more of something is going to be decreasing. So for example, if I told you the marginal benefit of the 3rd unit was 20, and then I asked you, what is the marginal benefit of the 4th unit? And I gave you some options and only one of them was less than 20, that has to be the new marginal benefit. Or said differently, if I gave you a marginal benefit value that was above 20, you know that can't be the marginal benefit of the fourth because marginal benefits are decreasing, which is really what we said was reflected in our demand curve. On the flip side, if we think about the marginal cost to anything, we said those would be increasing, right? That I'll use my most efficient resources to produce the first one, next most efficient to the second. So every unit I'm using less and less efficient resources or it's more and more costly. We said that was kind of reflected in our supply curve. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Like I said, I think we worked through, at least in some capacity, most of the problems here on this practice exam. Any other questions that people had logistically about the exam? Other problems that you wanted to see worked through? Okay. Okay, so once again, this time is for you guys, so I don't have anything pre-planned. I generally just go through questions as they come. You guys were a little bit quieter than my other section, so I think we did, like I said, work through most of these, if not all of them, and then I added some stuff in. One thing that you'll need to make sure you have done before the end of the day today is, oh, here we go. Do we have to join? No, you don't have to join the Zoom during the exam. Once again, it's a 4-hour time block, so it'll just be any hour and 15 minutes that works for you in that range. You can start the exam and have the full hour and 15 minutes. But the participation quiz for today should be an easy one. Should be easy points. Place them if you've missed, some already or not done as well on some of the other ones. It's just which module do you feel most nervous about? This is just a way for me to collect some data, look at the results of the exam, and kind of think about maybe how I can change things moving forward. Also, just what students are kind of having the most difficulty with. I also have wanted to get some feedback. In these live lectures, would you prefer that we kind of keep doing what I am doing, which is spend the same amount of time on slides and .cam reviewing practice problems on your own? Or I can try to work through the slides and provide maybe a little bit less, fewer .cam stuff or fewer examples when talking about the principles, just going through a little bit quicker and try to save 10 to 15 minutes at the end of every class to work more on practice problems from that module. It's kind of up to you. I see the benefits of both. If you're putting the time in to work through those practice problems on your own, I could see how, having a better discussion and explanation of the actual principles, like I've currently been doing, might be preferred. But this is a little bit different than my typical in-person classes in that, fall, spring semester classes, in that there aren't some additional resources to see other people work through these practice problems. So I just kind of wanted to kind of get some feedback from you guys. And I might try to, we'll look at that and might update kind of what I'm doing here after this exam a little bit, depending on the responses I see. Okay. So make sure you get on. They're just preference based. There's no right or wrong answer. So it looks like these are selected as right. It's not. You can select any answer and you'll get the full 2 points for each one, being 4 points for that participation quiz. So that should be pretty easy points. With the exam, kind of with that question about being on Zoom, for the second exam, I might use a built-in tool on Canvas, which is a lockdown browser. We haven't had time to kind of get that up and running, so I didn't want it to cause any problems tomorrow. In the future, the exam might look a little bit different, but we'll kind of get some practice with that lockdown browser before we have that second exam in the final. Okay. Other than that, any questions for me? Otherwise, I'll probably end this a little bit early, unless there's other questions people want to see worked through. Okay. So